Okay, we're picking up where we left off, and we need to decide these top equations, which one we should factor, which one we should take the square roots, and which one we need to use the quadratic formula on, and which one we should use for completing the square. So when we look here, I've heard B and I've heard C for factoring. The best choice for factoring would be one that has what? Two real rational roots. Because you can factor it, and the roots are rational, so they're not going to be really strange. So let's look at that. Let's try that. Let's put C here, and let's work it out. So factoring, we have our equation in standard form. So in our X box thing here, we would put 3 times 7 in the top and B in the bottom, which is negative 22. And this is a positive, which means when we multiply two numbers together, we get a positive, so they're either both negative or both positive. Okay? Because this is negative 22, that tells me that both of these signs are going to be negatives, because negative times negative is positive, and negative plus negative is equal to negative. So what would the factors be? Okay. They add up to 22. How about 1 and 21? Did those add up to 22? And then negative 1 times negative 21 equals positive 21. So our factors, okay, we want to take and divide by the coefficient of A, which is 3. So if we have negative 1 over 3, we can't simplify that, so you move the 3 in front of your variable and then subtract the 1. Okay, that's the first factor. The other one, we can simplify the variable, or we can simplify the fraction here, so it's negative 21 over 7, x minus 7. Okay? So, that means 3x minus 1 times x minus 7 equals 0 when we're solving. So we set 3x minus 1 equals 0, or x minus 7 equals 0. And if I go 3x minus 1, I have to add 1 to both sides, and then I'm going to divide by 3, right? So x is equal to positive 1/3. And here I would add 7 to both sides, and x is equal to positive 7. So x is equal to 1/3 and positive 7. Those are real rational roots. And it wasn't terribly difficult to factor. So that makes sense. Okay. I do enjoy doing math, yes. I couldn't do this job if I didn't. Square roots. Now, for there to be a square root, if you look back at the previous day's notes, we said that when we're doing square roots, that's sometimes a good method when there is no b term or no x. So which one of those equations does not have an x? Okay, so b. This one is going to be b. So let's try that equation. We have negative 2x squared equals negative 144. The first thing we want to do is solve for just the x squared term because we want to be able to take the square root of both sides. So I would first subtract 144 rather, from both sides. So that gives me negative 2x squared equals negative 144. I would divide both sides by negative 2. Then we have just x squared equals positive 72. Right? What's my next step? What are we trying to do here? Yep. So to get rid of the square root, we would take this, or to get rid of the squared term, x squared term, we want to take the square root. So x is equal to, does 72 have a perfect square factor? Yes, 4. Can you think of any others? Yes. Okay, let's talk about 72 for a second. Okay, so if we had 72 here, and we factored out 4, 132, yeah, it's 18. So 4 and 18, right? Yeah, well, you're correct. We're just not finished. Does 18 have a perfect square factor? 2 and 9? 9 is a perfect square factor. 2 is actually not a perfect square. Okay, so if we take 4 times 9 is what? 36. And 2. We could just say the square root of 4 is 2 and the square root of 9 is 3 and 2 times 3 is 6, or we can say the square root of 36 times 2. And that gives me plus or minus 6 radical 2. Okay. Completing the square. What's the criteria for completing the square? Flip back to the previous day's notes, and we said that we complete the square when there's no x squared coefficient and the b term is even. Okay, so D, there's no x squared coefficient, and 6 is even, so that's a good choice. A does not have an even b term, so that kind of makes it simpler. We have x squared plus 6x minus 15 equals 0. So complete the square, I want to group the first 2 terms on the left side and move the constant to the right side. So I have x squared plus 6x, I'm leaving a space there, and I add 15 to both sides to get the 15 over here by itself. Okay? Now here, I am going to add half of b squared. So I'm going to say plus half of 6 is 3 squared, right? So if I add 3 squared to the left side, I also have to add 3 squared to the right side. 3 squared is 9, correct? That means this side we have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals, and on the right side we now have 24. Can I factor this perfect square trinomial? It's going to be x plus 3, because that's what we created, right? X plus 3 squared. We took half of the 6 here to give us our 3, and that 3 term squared. So we have x plus 3 squared equals 24. Now what's our next step? I'm going to take the square root. And the square root of x plus 3 is equal to x plus 3 squared is just x plus 3. The square root of 24, I'm going to factor 24 into any perfect square factors. 8 isn't a perfect square, 4 is. So 4 and 6. 6 doesn't have a square root, but 4 does. So that's equal to plus or minus, the square root of 4 is 2, and we can't take the square root of 6. Now we're almost done. No, we have to take and subtract 3 from both sides. Okay? And then I get x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 2 radical 6. And this is the 2 solutions. Now these are irrational, but they are real. We didn't take the square root of a negative number. Finally, the quadratic formula. Whenever we think our solutions are going to be imaginary, like example A here, that is probably your best time to use the quadratic formula. Okay? So here, remember the quadratic formula, x is equal to negative b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. I substitute in those values, and I would get x is equal to the opposite of b would be positive 9 plus or minus, and negative 9 squared is going to be 81 minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 21 all over 2 times a is 2 times 1. So we first figure out what's under my radical. So I have 9 plus or minus, this is 81 minus 4 times 21 is 84. So 81 minus 84 negative 3. And that's all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So we simplify. Can we simplify radical negative 3? Just a tiny bit. We can take out the negative because this is equal to the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 3. So if we take out the square root of negative 1, that is I. And radical 3 all over 2. It looks complicated, but it's not really, right? Did y'all follow the math? Okay. Don't get discouraged. Okay. So, quick review here. Solving quadratic equations. It says work together to complete each problem. Do not divide up the work. Each person should be participating. At the end of class, one person's paper will be chosen at random to be graded for the group.
No.
Because we're COVIDing, we're just going to do it as a class. Okay, so I expect each of you to contribute. Factoring. All right, we'll go around the room. Okay, Serenity. To factor, what method do we use? X box. Very good. On the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not written in standard form. I didn't notice that. So it would be minus 6x minus 7 equals 0. So let's go again. Serenity, I'm sorry. What was your first answer? I think she said it the other way. Yeah. So, yes, the first method, it was negative 7 on top and negative 6 on the bottom because it's A times C on top and B on the bottom. So factors of negative 7 that add up to negative 6. Now, look at our signs here. When this is negative, what does that mean about our two factors? Yes, Nathan. Yes. Okay, so that's correct, but I wanted you to determine the signs here. So if this is negative, that means one of these is negative, the other one is positive. Okay? And if this is negative, that means the larger absolute value of the two is negative. So, our factors here, we don't have a coefficient of A, so those are both over 1. They simplify as the same value. So it's x minus 7 times x plus 1 equals 0. So you solve each one, set it equal to 0. And you add 7 to both sides, add 1 to both sides. So my x is equal to positive 7 and negative 1. Technically, I should have written those in the opposite order. All right. So, Nathan, If I do my Xbox method here, what goes in the top?
35.
No, 35 goes on the bottom.
I'm not sure if I can
It's A times C. What is A times C? Right. Okay. So 96 on top, 35 on bottom. Both of these signs are positive. So this is positive, this is positive. Factors of 96 that add up to 35. Yes. 32 and 3. That sounds correct. Does everybody agree? Now, 32 and 3 were not finished. What do we have to do now, Nathan? Divide by what? Excellent. So if I divide by 4, this will simplify. This is equal to just positive 8. This one does not simplify, so it is equal to 4x plus 3. So we have x plus 8 and 4x plus 3. So, to solve, if I have 4x plus 3 equals 0, I would subtract 3 from both sides, and then divide by what, Nathan? Divide by 4? Okay, so x equals negative 3/4, or if we have x plus 8 equals 0, subtract 8 from both sides. So negative 3/4 and negative 8. Square roots. Cheyenne, can we do square roots here? Okay. Why is it, how do you know you can do square roots? Not a just x term. This is x squared. We don't have just the x term, so there is no b term in this. So we first have to get it in to x squared equals some value. If I subtract 2 from both sides, that gives me 10x equals 280. So Serenity, what would you do next? Excellent. So I'm dividing both sides by 10. And I have x squared is equal to 28. Now, Jaden, what would I do next? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to take the square root, right? So x is equal to, does 28 have any factors? 7 and 4, very good. So we do have a perfect square for 4. We put plus or minus 2. We do not have a perfect square for 7, so we leave it under the radical. So that is our solution. Okay, Jaden, completing the square root method here, what would I need to do first? We want to get our x squared by itself, right? We would subtract 50 from both sides, okay? Because we want just the x squared term. If we add or subtract anything, we would undo that first. Then if we multiply or divide anything, we would undo that next. So the inverse operation of adding 50 is subtracting 50. That leaves me with 2x squared equals, yes. Okay. I have a 2 in front of my x term here. I want just the x squared term, or at least this value to have a perfect square root. That will work as well. Okay. If I divide by 2, we get 108 is equal to x squared, negative 108 rather. Now my last step would be to take the square root of both sides. I have to factor this into something that has a perfect square root. 9 and 12 work, but 12 has a factor that has a perfect square root. What would that be? Okay, so 4 and 3. So we have the square root of negative 1, which is I, the square root of 9, which is 3, times the square root of 4, which is 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, right? We do not have a square root for the 3, so we leave radical 3 there. This is positive or negative. That's our answer. So this is 2 imaginary solutions. We could have used the quadratic formula to do that one as well. Okay. Completing the square. So to complete the square, I have to group which type terms on the left side. Yeah, on the right side, we want the 3 and the 7. So, and that was a plus 3 or a minus 3? I marked through mine, I can't tell. Okay, so I would subtract 3 from both sides. And I have x squared plus 12x. I'm going to leave a space there to add my half of b squared. Equals 7 minus 3 is 4. I need to add something to both sides, and that something is half of my b term squared. And b here is 12, so I'm going to add 6 squared is 36, yes. So 36 to both sides. Okay, then this is a perfect square trinomial. My first term is x, the last term is 6. Both of these signs are positive, so this is plus. Okay, that's equal to 40, which factors into what? Mm-hmm. 10 and 4, and 10 just has factors of 2 and 5, which are not perfect squares, so we're going to stop there. If I take the square root of this side, The square root of x plus 6 squared is just x plus 6. And that's equal to positive or negative. Square root of 4 is 2. We don't have the square root of 10, and it will not factor anymore into anything that has a perfect square root. So we can't simplify that term anymore, but we can move this 6, right? Because we want x equals, not x plus 6 equals. So we subtract 6. So our answer is negative 6 plus or minus 2 radical 10. Not 5. 4, 5. Okay, so we want to get just the x terms on one side. So that's 6x squared minus 12x. I'm going to leave a space there, and I'm moving the 38 to the opposite side. So I'm adding 38 to 10, gives me 48. Any questions there? We take half of this. Wait, before we do that, notice that there's 6, 12, and 48. So we can factor out a 6. If I factor out 6, that leaves me x squared minus 2x equals 48 goes in, is divided by 6 is equal to 8. Okay? So now we can basically disregard the 6 in our factors, but right now let's look at half of our b value, which would be negative 1. I square that. If you square a negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So if I add a positive 1 to this side of the equation, I have to add the positive 1 to this side. So now I can factor this into x minus 1 squared. Okay? And I can take the square root of both sides. We can just drop the 6 here. Square root of both sides, I have x plus, I add 1 to both sides. X plus 1 on one side, 3 on the other. So if I have plus or minus 3, and I add 1, so x is equal to positive 3 plus 1 is 4, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. Okay, I think everybody needs practice on this, so we're just going to say this is the assignment page for today. There is a quiz on the next 2 pages. We will skip that, and I will give you a new packet tomorrow. So we took we'll have a quiz tomorrow. Guys, that's so do this practice. Tomorrow we'll have a quiz with some of the questions very similar to the one in the packet here. Okay? So you'll need to know how to solve. I'll have one on there for factoring, one for square roots, one for completing the square, one for quadratic formula, find the discriminant, and I probably won't have one choose the best method. Okay? So finish this page, submit that for your assignment for today. Have a good day. Thanks.